If you're looking to main swap or looking for a class or spec to alt in 10.2 when it drops, we have an early look at what specs are going to be absolutely busted in 10.2, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to be right on the money about this. So you're probably wondering what I'm talking about. How do you know this, Voodoo? We're not even in 10.1.7 yet. How do you know anything about 10.2? That's way too far to call, and you're probably right, but looking at past history, we can make an educated guess, and I'll get to that. So what am I talking about? Well, there's two things. Reworked classes, basically, is going to be the topic of this video. Classes that get reworked and then are immediately incredibly busted and broken. It's happened multiple times. I'll show you after. But for 10.2, there are two things planned. One of them is a rogue rework. Now, the rogue rework was supposed to come at 10.1.5, which people may or not have known. By the way, that would have been kind of crazy to see that happen. Might have made a bit more of a diverse meta in 10.1.5, but we'll get there. So it was supposed to come out then, it didn't. So in this interview from like July 5th, which by the way was my birthday, so that was cool. Ian went over an interview with Wowhead, and in this interview they talked about where this thing's going to come up. It's not going to be in 10.1.5. If that wasn't clear, we're planning on it in a much later patch, yada yada yada. Ultimately things happen, whatever, boo, 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 blah. But this is most likely going to happen in 10.2. That being the most, like, the next major patch. There's not really any reworks happening in 10.1.7. The only things that are changing is that rest of Druids are getting one new talent and getting a little bit of rebalance around that, and then Mistweaver getting some like mana tea changes. So very minor things overall, very minor class and spec changes in terms of everything there. So 10.2 is looking to be the time when rogues get their rework. All three rogue specs are, they're all right. Sub is very strong in Mythic Plus, I will say. I mean, obviously it's not in the God comp, but it's very good. It's one of the better melee. Ass and Outlaw are not as good, and all three are kind of mid in Raid. But I do think that this change might help out. So that's one thing. However, another thing, this comes from August 10th, is this Discipline Priest note. So they did little buffs and changes, nerfed a few things, buffed a few things. Developers note, Discipline Priest is not performing as well as we'd like, so for this week we're increasing their trauma healing. In a future patch, we are working on redesigning some of their talent options and making tuning adjustments there as well. What does that mean? Well, that means that in a future patch, Discipline Priest is going to come through and get a rework. Now, reworks are kind of crazy things in Dragonflight so far, it seems. Practically every single time a rework has happened, the class has been pretty insane for a few weeks until they get nerfed down. I mean, obviously everyone knows 10.1.5, but basically every single rework they did, those classes were very powerful and very strong. Not always incredibly busted, but always very strong towards the top tier of the meta until later on they came through and got some nerfs. So with this Discipline Priest redesign happening, which most likely 10.2, obviously this could happen later. And then also this rogue rework also most likely happening in 10.2. We're looking to see that these two classes, class being rogue, spec being disc priest, are probably going to be incredibly powerful. Now, there's a chance Havoc changes happen there as well. I'm going to do a separate video on that because I want to talk about it more in depth. Basically the developer for Rogue and Demon Hunter is Reels. It's the same guy. I mean, obviously it's a huge team, but he's like the main head guy. And he was in the Demon Hunter Discord talking about stuff and kind of asking for the feedback for the thread to be updated. So there's a bit of hope for Havoc there, but I'll do a separate video on that. They could come in. But for right now, the two reworks we know are Rogue and Disc Priest, and they are going to be busted. But what evidence do we have that reworks make classes busted? Well, besides looking at the current meta, we actually do see some trends. So we're going to hop over to that. So reworks, right, being incredibly strong. Well, we have kind of information from the past that shapes why I think these two specs or whatever are going to be incredibly powerful. And there's basically been 3 or so reworks that have led to these specs that are being reworked being really crazy right afterwards. Now there is some other stuff. There's like some like Unholy and Frost stuff that made them really good, or some smaller, more minor reworks. But generally, the big major reworks often cause these specs to be incredibly powerful. Now these ones, the ones on the death on your screen made them better, but I wouldn't really count that as a rework. But if you scroll down to the first one, I'm going to slow down a little bit here, so my apologies. 10.1.7 in March is when the Paladin, 10.0.7 is when the Paladin changes came in. And the Paladin changes were very wide-reaching. There were basically no changes for Holy. those came later, and we'll get there. But they did a lot of changes to the class tree, which were like numerous and made it way better. They also basically did a lot of changes to Protection Paladin, and then essentially rebuilt Retribution Paladin's tree from the ground up. And in 10.0.5 or 10.0.7, sorry, a lot of numbers here. Retribution Paladin was probably the best spec in Mythic Plus, and then also one of the best specs in Raid for that entire patch. Now, again, it was an end of tier patch, so it doesn't really matter that much, and then they got nerfed pretty quickly. But right after these came in, they were really crazy and just really good. Now, I will say that the rework made them really fun, and they still are very fun. They've been nerfed a few times, so they're not like as powerful anymore. But Retribution Paladin, after the rework, was very strong and very just fun to play with. So there's so many talent changes here. I'm not going to go through it. It's too much. It's also really old news by now. So that happened. Ret changes and Protection Paladin changes in 10.0.7. We also saw Restoration Shaman changes, which are important to note, and we will get there. So 10.0.7 saw Resto Shaman changes and some Paladin changes. Flash forward to 10.1. Now, sorry if it's bright white here. You might get a little bit of a flashbang effect. This is a pretty good, just like, page I found from this random website for how Shadow Priest were changed. But Shadow Priest got a rework going into 10.1. And for those of you who've been around, Shadow Priest went from being a very good Mythic Plus spec in 10.0 and Season 1 to mandatory in Season 2. Now, part of that was because of the utility just being insanely powerful in this suite of dungeons. On top of that, their rework to their damage profile made them a lot better. So basically what happened is they fixed their button bloat, they shifted their kit into more Psychic Link damage, and they just did a lot of different like build stuff. And in the end, they did all these changes here for Shadow Priest coming into 10.1. So a pretty massive rework, pretty large rework here, giving Shadow Priest a lot of damage, a lot of different utility, and just making them very, very powerful. Essentially a lock, making Psychic Link effective Devouring Plague and Shadow Red Death, and basically dealing like 30% damage if they're single target everywhere. Give them a very valuable, very strong profile that allowed them to be incredibly like busted for season 2, and even until today. So 10.1, we saw those reworks, and then 10.1.5, probably the most famous reworks, I guess you could say. We saw our Bear Druid reworks come in, essentially having them be completely changed around. They already had an insanely busted tier set. Boomy was reworked too, and I will say Boomy's stuff is actually really powerful. It's just they're not as good as what's currently there. So we got Boomy, we got Guardian Druid, which is obviously the best tank right now. And then we scrolled down even more and we got the Mage changes. So Frost was reworked. Arcane got some touches, but Arcane was honestly mostly fine before. Fire was basically reworked completely from the ground up a bit. Well, I won't say ground up, but they got a ton of changes. Frost got a ton of changes, and both of these specs kind of skyrocketed and were insanely powerful. I know you see Fire as like the kind of crazy AoE spec, but for a period of time, Fire and Frost are both very equal, right? So Fire's insanely strong after the rework, Frost insanely strong after the rework, and in 10.1.5, we also saw the Holy Paladin rework actually finally come through from 10.0.7 where it should have been. So massive rework here. Slight stuff to the other two, but nowhere near as much. Basically rebuilt the entire tree for Holy Paladins, reimagined everything they can do, and they became the best healer by a country mile. Best damage, best healing, best everything. So that's like 5 or 6 specs now, 7 specs now, where they received a major rework and became insanely strong. And obviously I haven't shown any data yet. We look at this Reddit post, it can see the top 2,000 M+ runs by each week for all of Dragonflight. The post is kind of a mess, it's by alphabetical order. So we're gonna look at this one instead, which is showing the top 2,000 runs split apart by role. So DPS specs, tank specs, and healer specs. So this is basically the start of the season. This is 10.0, 10.0.5. Then we see around here, we see a big jump in DPS for Retribution Paladin when 10.0.7 hits. Now again, 10.0.7 was a smaller patch. It didn't really change too much. We see a massive jump up in Protection Paladins with their rework, in Retribution Paladins with their rework, and in Restoration Shamans with their rework. In 10.1, which happened roughly down here, we see a bump up of Balanced Druids. We see a bump up of Shadow Priests, which is when their rework happened. So very powerful there. You'll see some Vengeance start to climb up because of tier set stuff. Obviously not all the changes are happening because of reworks. A lot of it's happening because of like just like tier sets and gear and stuff like that. But you know, you see a rework, you see the class just blast forward a lot more here, a lot more here, a lot more here. And then obviously it's hard to miss at the bottom of the tree here. But when the biggest rework of all, the 10.1.5 changes came in, we can see that Augmentation Evoker, brand new spec, is covering all the meta. Fire Mage and Frost Mage are just omnipresent in most comps. Shadow Priest is still here and actually didn't really change the representation too much. They were already busted. Bear Druid shoots up to the top. Holy Paladin shoots up to the top. So we can see that basically whenever a major rework comes in, the representation in the meta shoots up. Obviously, this level is crazier than anything we've seen, but we can see it time and time again. Mage rework, Mage gets a massive N+ portion. Priest rework down here, they get a large portion as well. Guardian Druid rework, they shoot up. Holy Paladin rework, they shoot up. Retribution Paladin rework, massive changes, went from barely any to a very large amount here, as you can see by this small increase, like small line here, into a major increase down here. And then even Protection Paladin, right, they went from Prot Warrior, and then all of a sudden the pink bar just kind of skyrockets after their minor rework in 10.0.7. And same with Restoration Shaman, you barely see any, and then all of a sudden Restoration Shaman is probably the best healer up until the Holy Paladin changes. So obviously reworks are good, but I think it's kind of an issue where whenever a spec gets changed and gets like balance changes done to them, they just become the de facto best thing you could possibly be doing. So that's definitely an issue for Blizzard to deal with. But from what we know and what we've seen in the past, if these specs are getting major reworks, if all the rogue specs, if Discipline Priest, maybe even Havoc Demon Hunter, are getting these massive reworks and massive changes, they are more than likely going to spike in the representation and be very powerful. Now again, all these things are a bit of a social factor as well. Things get reworked, people want to try these shiny new toys, shiny new tools, but it's not all of that. You see massive increases of specs that get reworks in the top 2,000 and plus runs each week, which means not just like the general Johnny who's doing his 15s is trying it out. The people who are doing the best M+ runs in the world are taking these rework specs and doing the highest keys with them. So realistically, Blizzard does need to take a look at how they're redesigning specs like that, because whenever you redesign a spec, it shouldn't be the absolute insane thing, right? Balance should be a bit better than that, obviously. But if you want to get a head start on things, get your Discipline Priests ready, get your Rogues ready, because come 10.2, come the reworks are there, those specs are going to most likely be absolutely insane and be super busted for M+. So grab your score when you can off them, get ready, because those changes are going to come. So that's going to be it for the video today. Bit of a general WoW video. I have some pretty banger Havoc videos coming in the next few days, so subscribe for those. I'll have more general WoW stuff as well. I hope you guys enjoyed. Leave a like, drop a comment, all that stuff. Follow me on Twitch in the description. Join my Discord in the description. And I'll see you guys on Friday with my next video. So thanks for watching. Good luck leveling your rogues and your Discipline Priests. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace. A big thank you to my channel members, 121, Payne, Andrew Kunel, Joshua O'Connell, Brad Wisniak, Zuligan, James, Oxclamation, It's Bulk, Flapjack67, Angelo, and Spaghetti. A big shout out to all you guys. Thank you guys so much for all the help. If you want to become a channel member and help support me, maybe make better and better videos, or just work on getting new stuff out, you also get exclusive perks, exclusive access to parts of my Discord, exclusive access to VOD review, some scripts, exclusive emotes, stuff like that. And then consider following the link in the description, become a channel member, and helping me out. Of course, you don't have to, but I really appreciate it. Anyways, thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.